too deep. But I wanted to start with the traditional side of processing. And there's the latest study that I saw on this was from McKinsey. It was a couple of years old, but I think it's still viable. Number one is only about 20% of the data that an enterprise deals with is in a format that can be handled by computers natively, so like in an EDI format. And of that 20%, only about 30% of that has been handled by EDI. So there's an enormous amount of data that is flying around in organizations that is not handled in an automated, computerized fashion. And that's for a variety of reasons. You're not going to, for example, if you're doing invoices, you're not going to automate the invoice that comes from the person who mows the lawn of your office. That's the volume is not high enough, the dollar amount is not high enough to be important. So you have to focus your resources where they are most efficient, and that leaves a giant gap in processing these documents. And that's where something like IDP comes in, and it can be a broad net that you cast to catch a wide variety of document types. And Lee later is going to talk about variety. But it really gives you a capability to handle a broader range than you could do with something like EDI. So, originally people handled everything in the document space manually. That's what we're showing here. You get zero straight through processing. It's got to be touched by a person at every point along the way. Like Lee said, about 30 years ago, we started doing OCR work, and it does have a positive effect. It does handle a certain amount of the documentation. You get about a 30% straight through processing. One of the downsides of a traditional OCR package is that you spend a lot of time configuring that OCR package to do what you need it to do. So it takes a lot of resources up front, and you get a limited benefit on the backside, but you do get benefit. So let's talk a little bit about modern day IDP. So you're always going to have that top side of document processing or data processing in general. That's more the EDI side up top. You spend time defining and agreeing about what you're going to exchange. You communicate that data, whether it's FTP or posts or however you decide to exchange that data, but it's a very predefined mechanism. You have some programs that validate that data, and then you push that into your system of record. And again, that's somewhere in the 30% range of data that you have to deal with as an organization. That leaves 70% of the use cases untouched, and that's what we're trying to focus on by extending that IDP automation. So there's a number of steps that you have to do when you're looking at doing IDP. Number one is you have to classify and separate those documents according to purpose. So is this an invoice? Is this a purchase order? Is it a credit memo? Is it a contract? You're going to handle each one of those differently, and you're going to want your OCR engine to recognize certain things about that. The next thing that you're going to have to do is digitize that. You're going to need that OCR engine in order to extract that data. And this is, by the way, one of the more powerful things. There's a lot of powerful things, but this is one of the more powerful things about IQBot that I think is important to bring out, and that is you can swap the OCR engine that you're using out behind the scenes. You can use Tesseract if that's what you like. You can use Abby if that's what you like, or if that's what's working for your documents better. You can use Google Vision. You can use Azure's Vision API. You can swap those out behind the scenes, and your pre-processing code and your post-processing code do not have to change. Nobody even sees the difference when you swap that OCR engine out, and the licensing is all covered inside of that. So that's a very powerful thing to do. We've done that with our existing clients, where we started with one OCR engine and ended up having to switch to another one as we added more invoices in this particular case. And that process was a seamless process to switch out to something that worked a little bit better. The next thing that you're going to do is decide whether or not what you got out of that OCR engine passes your criteria. And if it does, great, you move on. You can do some validation. You can do some extra work on the backside, go look things up in a database based on the data that you got out of the document itself, or maybe it didn't pass and it needs to go to a human to be adjusted. That's something that we do for our clients on a regular basis. We actually provide that service to take what the machine could not find and find it for them, so that what the client sees at the end state is a much higher, what we call STP, than what the machine can give. Then finally, you have the opportunity to put that data back into the system of record, just like you did when you were working with EDI, but you've got a lot more visibility into your documents and a lot more capability than just having a human read a sheet of paper and type it back into the system. You've got real system level integration back and forth. So it's a different world than it was before. And this slide is really just to point out that a document is not just a document. There are layers that you're dealing with. And the first layer is, what kind of document am I even dealing with? The second layer is, okay, I know what kind of document I'm dealing with. Let's just pick an invoice for an example. Most people are familiar with those. Which vendor is it from? Because I may have certain decisions that I want to make now that I know which vendor it is. I may have a net back agreement with the vendor, and I may want to take different action than I would with a different vendor where it's very important for me to check off the line items. And then it may be a third vendor where the volume is small enough that I really don't care about the line items, and all I care about is the header. What's the PO number and what is the total amount? And I'll verify that against the purchase order system, and if it's within tolerances, move on. So you go through these layers as you learn more about the document, and you can make these decisions, and then eventually you get to I call it the kernel of truth, is the bottom layer, where you finally say, okay, I've extracted what I can out of this, I've gotten what I'm going to get out of it, it's time to move on and put it in the system of record and put it to bed. So that is a little bit deeper dive, and what I'd like to do is turn it back over to Lee to talk a little bit about the variety, because that's one of the most important things in modern day processing of documents.